You should be careful what language you use to humiliate people, the waitress said softly, and for the first time that night, billionaire Ethan Calloway forgot how to smile. The crystal chandeliers above the Grand Meridian Ballroom shimmered like frozen stars, casting pale gold light across rows of polished silverware and champagne glasses worth more than most people's monthly rent. Outside, Manhattan glowed through towering windows streaked with winter rain, but inside the ballroom, warmth, wealth, and quiet arrogance filled the air like expensive cologne. Ethan Calloway sat at the center of it all, relaxed in a tailored black tuxedo, one arm draped across the back of his chair as investors laughed at something he had just said in Italian. The laughter was low and elegant, the kind shared by people used to believing the rest of the world existed beneath them. Naomi Brooks moved carefully between the tables with a silver tray balanced against one palm, her black uniform pressed neatly despite the long shift, her dark curls tied back beneath a satin scarf. She carried herself with calm precision, never rushing, never shrinking, even under the weight of wealthy eyes that rarely noticed servers unless something was wrong. Ethan barely glanced at her when she stepped beside the table to refill his wine glass. "Attenta," he muttered in Italian without looking up. "Careful." Then he smirked toward Lorenzo Romano, the billionaire investor seated beside him. People like her usually understand tone before words. A few men at the table chuckled quietly. Claire Whitmore laughed loudest of all, lifting her champagne flute as diamonds flashed against her wrist. "Maybe she thinks Italian is a brand of salad dressing," she whispered. More laughter followed. Naomi's hand paused only for a second as red wine streamed smoothly into Ethan's glass. Her expression did not crack. She simply set the bottle down gently on the white linen tablecloth. Then, in flawless Italian touched by the soft elegance of Florence, she answered without raising her voice. "And people like you often mistake silence for ignorance." The air vanished from the room. Ethan's smile froze instantly. Around the table, forks stopped midway to mouths. Even the piano player near the ballroom stage seemed to miss a note. Lorenzo Romano blinked hard before slowly lowering his glass. Claire stared at Naomi as if the waitress had suddenly transformed into someone else entirely. But Naomi did not wait for their reaction. She picked up the tray again with graceful calm, her dark eyes steady beneath the warm chandelier light. "Would anyone care for more sparkling water?" she asked politely in perfect English. No one answered. Ethan looked at her fully now for the first time that evening. Not at the uniform, not at the tray in her hand. At her. Something sharp moved behind his eyes, confusion first, then irritation, then something far more dangerous. Curiosity. Naomi turned away before he could speak and crossed the ballroom floor toward another table, her black shoes clicking softly against polished marble. The conversations around the room slowly returned in scattered whispers, but the energy had changed. The billionaire who controlled billion-dollar mergers with a single sentence had just lost control of his own table to a waitress who never raised her voice. And somewhere deep beneath Ethan Calloway's pride, something old and uncomfortable had begun to crack. The ballroom never fully recovered after Naomi spoke. Conversations returned in fragments, broken and uneven like glass settling after a crack. Ethan Calloway sat motionless for several seconds, one hand still resting near his untouched wine glass while the investors around him exchanged uncertain glances. Across the room, waiters moved carefully beneath the golden light, but now every quiet footstep seemed louder somehow. Claire leaned toward Ethan first, forcing a small laugh as she adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Well," she said lightly, someone clearly memorized a few phrases online. But even she did not sound convinced. Lorenzo Romano kept staring toward the far side of the ballroom, where Naomi was calmly arranging dessert plates beside another server. "That was not memorized," he said quietly in Italian. Ethan looked at him sharply. Lorenzo swirled the dark wine inside his crystal glass before continuing. Florence accent. Educated. Refined. Very difficult to fake. Ethan felt irritation tighten beneath his collar. He was not used to being the uncomfortable one in a room. Usually he controlled the rhythm of conversations, the laughter, the silence, even the exits. But now his attention kept drifting toward the woman carrying silver trays beneath the chandeliers. Naomi never looked back at his table once. That bothered him more than the embarrassment itself. Claire noticed it too. Her smile faded slightly. You are not seriously impressed by a waitress because she speaks Italian, she whispered. Ethan picked up his glass finally, though he did not drink. No, he answered slowly. I am impressed because she was not trying to impress anyone. Near the ballroom stage, soft jazz floated through the speakers while guests resumed eating expensive sea bass and truffle risotto beneath walls of white orchids. But the atmosphere had shifted. Several investors now glanced toward Naomi with open curiosity instead of dismissal. One elderly woman even thanked her in hesitant French after receiving fresh coffee. Naomi answered fluently without missing a step. Ethan nearly lowered his glass. Claire noticed that too. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. Okay, that is getting ridiculous, she muttered. Meanwhile, Naomi remained composed, moving through the ballroom with the same calm dignity she carried before anyone knew she spoke another language. There was no smugness in her face, no satisfaction. If anything, she looked tired. At exactly 9:15, Ethan excused himself from the table under the pretense of taking a business call. Instead, he crossed the ballroom slowly, weaving through investors and politicians until he reached the marble hallway leading toward the service corridor. The warm scent of garlic butter and fresh bread drifted from the kitchen doors. Voices echoed faintly behind stainless steel walls. Ethan stopped near the entrance without stepping inside. Through the narrow opening, he saw Naomi standing beside a small prep counter, helping a young dishwasher fold linen napkins. The girl could not have been older than 10 or 11, her braids tied with faded pink ribbons. Naomi smiled gently as she corrected the child's pronunciation of an Italian word written on a scrap piece of paper. Not vendetta, Naomi whispered patiently. Vendemmia. It means harvest. The little girl giggled and tried again. Naomi laughed softly with her. It was the first time Ethan had heard her laugh all evening. The sound caught him off guard. There was no bitterness in it. No anger. Just warmth. Real warmth. Ethan stood there longer than he intended, watching fluorescent kitchen lights reflect softly against stainless steel while steam curled upward from industrial sinks nearby. Then Naomi looked up suddenly. Their eyes met through the half-open kitchen door. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Ethan expected embarrassment or hostility. Instead, Naomi simply held his gaze calmly before turning back toward the little girl beside her. Somehow, that silence unsettled him even more than her perfect Italian had. Rain tapped softly against the towering ballroom windows as the charity gala drifted deeper into the night. But Ethan Calloway could no longer focus on the investors seated around him. Their voices blurred together beneath the low jazz music and the clinking of silverware. Numbers, contracts, expansion plans, all of it sounded distant now. His attention kept pulling toward the service corridor at the far end of the ballroom, where Naomi Brooks disappeared every few minutes carrying trays of wine and porcelain plates beneath the golden light. Claire noticed his distraction immediately. You are doing it again, she said quietly, forcing a smile for the guests around them. Ethan glanced at her. Doing what? Looking at her. Her voice remained pleasant on the surface, but tension sharpened beneath every word. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. I'm trying to figure her out. Claire gave a soft laugh that did not sound amused. She is a waitress, Ethan. There is nothing to figure out. Before he could answer, Lorenzo Romano suddenly stood from the table holding his wine glass. Excuse me, he announced warmly. I would like to thank your staff personally. Hospitality reflects leadership. Several guests nodded politely as Lorenzo crossed the ballroom floor toward the serving station. Ethan watched him go. Something in the older man's expression looked almost eager. Naomi had just finished placing miniature lemon tarts onto a tray when Lorenzo approached her. Mi scusi, he said gently in Italian. Which region taught you that accent? Naomi looked slightly surprised, but answered calmly. Mostly Florence. Some years in Rome afterward. Lorenzo blinked hard. Years? Nearby servers slowed their movements without meaning to. Even the bartender glanced over. Naomi adjusted the folded white towel resting over her arm. My mother worked overseas for a while when I was younger. Lorenzo smiled wider now, clearly fascinated. And literature? You studied. Naomi hesitated briefly before nodding once. A little. Lorenzo laughed softly under his breath. No one speaks like that from only a little study. Ethan stood from his table before realizing he was doing it. Claire's eyes narrowed immediately. He crossed the ballroom slowly, stopping just close enough to hear the conversation without interrupting. Lorenzo switched suddenly into rapid Italian, speaking far faster this time, discussing Renaissance poetry and a famous line from Dante. Naomi answered effortlessly, not rushed, not nervous, smooth and confident, like someone reopening a language she had not used in years but never truly lost. Lorenzo stared at her in disbelief. Madonna, he whispered. You know Dante? Naomi gave a small shrug. Enough to survive dinner conversations. Ethan felt something strange settle in his chest. This was no longer about a waitress surprising wealthy people with a foreign language. Every answer Naomi gave revealed another layer that did not belong inside this ballroom. Claire walked over moments later, heels tapping sharply across marble. Her smile was polished, but cold around the edges. Lorenzo, she interrupted sweetly, slipping beside Ethan. Surely you are not interrogating the staff during dessert. Lorenzo looked annoyed by the interruption. I am having the most intelligent conversation of the evening, he replied honestly. Claire's smile tightened. Naomi lowered her gaze politely and lifted the dessert tray again. Excuse me, she said softly before moving away toward another table. But as she passed Ethan, he noticed something tucked partially beneath the sleeve of her black uniform. A thin silver bracelet engraved with tiny Italian lettering worn soft with age. Naomi caught him looking and gently pulled the sleeve down before continuing across the ballroom. Ethan watched her disappear between the glowing tables while Lorenzo slowly shook his head beside him. Your waitress, the investor murmured quietly, is pretending to be much smaller than she really is. And for the first time in years, Ethan Calloway realized he was standing in a room where he might not be the smartest person after all. By 10 o'clock, the Grand Meridian Ballroom had become warmer, louder, and far more restless than before. The orchestra near the stage had shifted into slower jazz melodies while wealthy donors and investors drifted between tables carrying crystal glasses and polished smiles. Yet beneath the expensive perfume and soft laughter, tension still floated invisibly through the room like static before a storm. Naomi Brooks continued working without pause. She carried fresh coffee to one table, replaced folded napkins at another, and moved through the ballroom with steady grace despite the whispers following behind her now. People were no longer ignoring her. They were watching. Ethan Calloway stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Fifth Avenue, one hand inside his pocket while rain streaked silver across the dark glass outside. He should have been discussing contracts with investors from Milan and Chicago. Instead, his eyes kept following Naomi every time she crossed the room. You are staring again, Claire said sharply beside him. Ethan barely looked away from the ballroom floor. I am thinking. About the waitress. He exhaled slowly. About why someone with her education is carrying trays at midnight. Claire crossed her arms, the diamonds along her evening gown catching the chandelier light. Maybe because she made bad choices. Ethan finally turned toward her. Something in her tone bothered him. You do not know anything about her. Claire gave a quiet laugh. Neither do you. But suddenly everyone here is acting like she is some hidden genius because she speaks a few languages. Before Ethan could answer, the ballroom microphone crackled softly near the stage. A representative from Romano International stepped forward smiling warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, before tonight concludes, Mr. Lorenzo Romano has requested a small cultural toast in honor of our upcoming European partnership. Polite applause rippled across the room. Ethan straightened automatically. Public appearances were familiar territory again. Control, precision, predictability. But then Lorenzo smiled toward the service station. And I would like assistance from the remarkable young woman who has been helping all evening. The room shifted instantly. Naomi froze beside a table holding a tray of espresso cups. Several guests turned toward her at once. Claire's face tightened. Ethan watched Naomi carefully as she approached the stage area beneath the chandeliers. She did not look excited. She looked cautious. Lorenzo handed her a small leather folder. A short Italian welcome passage, he explained kindly. Would you honor us? Naomi glanced down at the page. For the first time all evening, Ethan noticed hesitation cross her face. Tiny, brief, but real. Claire noticed too. Her lips curved slightly. There it is, she whispered under her breath. She finally found something she cannot fake. The ballroom quieted. Glasses lowered. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Naomi stood beneath the warm golden lights, holding the folder gently in both hands while rain whispered faintly against the windows high above Manhattan. Then she began to read. Her voice was calm, low, and impossibly smooth, carrying through the ballroom with elegant precision. The Italian sounded rich and effortless, every syllable soft and controlled like music drifting through candlelight. Several European investors exchanged stunned looks immediately. Lorenzo slowly smiled with visible pride. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest again. But halfway through the passage, Naomi paused suddenly. Her eyes lowered to one specific line near the bottom of the page. Silence spread across the ballroom. Claire folded her arms, clearly satisfied. Ethan took one step forward instinctively. Then Naomi looked up slowly. This sentence is incorrect, she said politely in English. Murmurs swept across the room. Lorenzo blinked. Incorrect. Naomi nodded gently and turned the folder outward slightly. The legal translation changes the meaning of the partnership clause. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Naomi continued carefully. This wording suggests exclusive control over international licensing rights. The silence afterward felt enormous. Several attorneys near the stage exchanged alarmed glances. Lorenzo grabbed the folder quickly, scanning the page with growing confusion. Ethan moved beside him at once, eyes narrowing as he read the paragraph himself. And there it was. Hidden beneath elegant language and formal translation sat a contractual detail that could have cost Callaway Technologies millions of dollars by morning. Ethan looked up slowly at Naomi beneath the chandelier light. She stood perfectly still, holding the empty espresso tray against her side, while an entire ballroom of wealthy executives stared at her in stunned silence. Claire had gone pale beside the stage, and somewhere deep inside Ethan Callaway, pride gave way to something far more unsettling. Respect. For several long seconds, nobody inside the Grand Meridian ballroom moved at all. The chandeliers glowed above hundreds of frozen faces while rain continued sliding down the dark Manhattan windows like silver threads. Ethan Callaway stared at the contract in his hands, reading the Italian clause again, more slowly this time. Naomi stood only a few feet away beneath the golden stage lights, calm and composed despite the weight of every eye in the room resting on her. Lorenzo Romano adjusted his glasses sharply. This translation was approved before tonight, he said, confusion rising in his voice. One of the attorneys stepped forward quickly and took the folder with tense fingers. The room filled with uneasy murmurs as legal teams began quietly whispering around nearby tables. Claire remained motionless near the stage, her champagne glass untouched now. Ethan lifted his eyes toward Naomi again. How did you catch that so fast? He asked. Naomi hesitated briefly before answering. Because the wording is not business Italian, she said softly. It is academic legal structure. Most people would skim past it. Her voice carried no arrogance. That somehow made the moment even heavier. Ethan looked back down at the page. She was right. Hidden beneath elegant phrasing sat language subtle enough to escape nearly everyone in the ballroom, including his own legal advisors. Lorenzo exhaled sharply and shook his head. Miss Brooks, he said slowly, you may have just prevented an international disaster. A nervous laugh spread through part of the crowd. Others looked embarrassed now, especially the same guests who had laughed earlier when Ethan mocked her. Naomi lowered her gaze politely. I was only trying to help. Claire suddenly stepped forward, forcing brightness back into her voice. Well, she said lightly, that certainly made the evening more exciting. But nobody laughed this time. Ethan noticed that too. The room had shifted completely. Respect had replaced amusement, and Claire could feel it slipping away from her. Naomi gently handed the empty tray to another server and stepped down from the stage area. Excuse me, she said quietly. I still have tables to clear. Ethan watched her disappear through the crowd while attorneys gathered around Lorenzo, discussing emergency revisions to the contract. Yet Ethan barely heard any of it. His mind remained fixed on the woman who had just protected his company while wearing a black serving uniform and carrying espresso cups. Half an hour later, the gala finally began thinning out. Luxury cars lined the rain-soaked curb outside while guests disappeared into elevators and black SUVs beneath glowing hotel lights. The orchestra had stopped playing. Workers quietly folded tablecloths and collected abandoned champagne glasses under dimmer lighting now. Ethan loosened his tie as he walked alone through the quieter ballroom. For the first time all evening, exhaustion settled visibly across his face. Near the far service hallway, he spotted Naomi again. She was stacking clean plates carefully beside a rolling cart, while little Mia sat nearby, swinging her legs from a prep counter stool, still practicing Italian words from a folded napkin sheet. Naomi smiled softly when the child pronounced one correctly. Ethan slowed his steps without meaning to. Vendemmia, Mia repeated proudly. Naomi laughed gently. Perfect. The sound echoed warmly against the stainless steel kitchen walls. Ethan stood there watching for a moment before finally speaking. You embarrassed me tonight. Naomi looked up calmly. Mia glanced nervously between them. But Naomi did not apologize. No, she answered quietly. You embarrassed yourself. I only answered you. The fluorescent kitchen lights hummed softly overhead. Somewhere deeper in the hotel, dishes clattered faintly. Ethan should have been offended by her bluntness. Instead, he found himself nodding once because deep down, he knew she was right. Naomi picked up another stack of plates carefully. People hear what they expect to hear, she continued gently. Most wealthy men speak around workers like we disappear after serving dinner. Ethan leaned slightly against the doorway, studying her face under the pale kitchen light. And do we? Naomi met his eyes steadily. Sometimes worse. Sometimes you forget we are human before anything else. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Ethan looked away briefly toward the rain sliding down the small kitchen window beside the sinks. Then he asked the question that had been building inside him all night. Who are you really, Naomi Brooks? For the first time that evening, Naomi's expression changed completely. Not fear, not anger, something sadder, older. She lowered her eyes toward the silver bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve and answered softly. Someone who learned a long time ago that intelligence does not impress people nearly as much as power does. The rain had stopped by the time the last guests left the Grand Meridian Hotel, but the city outside still shimmered with reflections from traffic lights and neon signs across wet Manhattan streets. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers had dimmed to a softer amber glow while hotel staff quietly dismantled centerpieces and folded white linens stained with wine rings and candle wax. The glamour of the evening was fading now, revealing the tired machinery underneath. Naomi Brooks pushed a silver cart slowly across the marble floor, collecting abandoned glasses, while soft instrumental music drifted faintly through hidden ceiling speakers. Her shoulders ached from the 12-hour shift, but her expression remained calm. Near the ballroom entrance, Ethan Calloway stood alone scrolling through emails on his phone without truly reading any of them. Every few seconds his eyes lifted instinctively toward Naomi again. He hated that he could not stop thinking about her. Not because she embarrassed him, because she unsettled him. Wealth usually simplified people in Ethan's world. Investors wanted leverage. Politicians wanted influence. Employees wanted promotions. Everyone moved according to recognizable patterns. But Naomi Brooks did not fit into any category he understood. That bothered him deeply. Across the room, Claire finished speaking sharply with one of the hotel coordinators before walking directly toward Ethan in heels that clicked like warning shots across the marble. We need to leave, she said coldly. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. In a minute, Claire followed his line of sight toward Naomi instantly. You cannot seriously still be thinking about her. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket. You mean the woman who saved my company tonight? Claire crossed her arms tightly. She corrected one translation mistake. A mistake that could have cost millions. Claire lowered her voice. Do you know what people are saying now? They are talking about her more than the partnership. Ethan said nothing. That silence irritated Claire more than any argument could have. She glanced toward Naomi again, watching the waitress help Mia reach stacked dessert plates on a counter nearby. Women like that are dangerous, Claire muttered quietly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What exactly does that mean? Claire hesitated only briefly. It means she knows how to make powerful men feel guilty. Intelligent women, without status, always do. The comment landed wrong immediately. Ethan looked at Claire for a long moment beneath the dim ballroom lights. For the first time in months, maybe years, he noticed how often she measured people according to usefulness, beauty, connections, wealth. Naomi, meanwhile, was kneeling beside Mia, helping the little girl tie a loose shoelace before the child went home. No cameras, no audience, no performance, just kindness when nobody important was watching. Ethan looked away from Claire slowly. I think you completely misread her. Claire gave a humorless laugh. And I think you are romanticizing a waitress because she bruised your ego. Before Ethan could answer, Lorenzo Romano approached, carrying his coat over one arm. The older investor smiled warmly toward Naomi across the ballroom. Remarkable young woman, he said honestly. Then he lowered his voice slightly toward Ethan. You know, she reminds me of someone. Ethan looked up immediately. Who? Lorenzo studied Naomi thoughtfully for a second. 5 years ago, I attended an academic summit in Florence. There was a young translator there. Brilliant. Spoke 4 languages. Corrected an entire legal panel during a trade negotiation. Ethan felt his attention sharpen instantly. What was her name? Lorenzo frowned slightly as he tried to remember. Brooks, he said at last. Naomi Brooks. Ethan stared at him. Across the ballroom, Naomi stood slowly after helping Mia with her shoe, brushing invisible dust from her uniform sleeve beneath the soft kitchen lights. Suddenly, the silver bracelet beneath her cuff made sense. The legal language, the literature references, the accent. Ethan looked back toward Lorenzo carefully. What happened to her? Lorenzo's expression dimmed slightly. Family illness, I heard. She disappeared from the academic world almost overnight. He paused before adding quietly. People expected her to become extraordinary. Ethan looked across the ballroom again. Naomi had returned to stacking dishes beside the service cart, unnoticed by nearly everyone left in the room. Yet all at once, Ethan realized something unsettling. She already was extraordinary. The only difference was that nobody important had bothered to see it until tonight. Just after midnight, the Grand Meridian Ballroom finally fell quiet. The last investors had disappeared into private elevators, and hotel workers moved through the enormous room, collecting empty champagne glasses beneath fading chandelier light. Outside, Manhattan glowed silver beneath damp streets, and drifting steam rising from subway grates. Naomi Brooks stepped through the rear service exit, carrying her coat folded over one arm. Cold night air wrapped around her instantly, carrying the distant sound of taxi horns and late traffic down Fifth Avenue. She exhaled slowly, exhausted. The alley beside the hotel was narrow but clean, lined with black delivery doors and dim yellow security lights reflecting against wet pavement. Naomi sat carefully on a small concrete bench near the loading entrance and slipped her hands into the sleeves of her coat. For the first time all evening, silence finally surrounded her. No wealthy guests. No whispers. No polished smiles. Just the city breathing around her in the dark. A few moments later, the heavy service door opened again behind her. Ethan Calloway stepped outside, loosening his tie against the cold air. Naomi looked up briefly, but said nothing. Ethan hesitated before walking closer. You disappeared, he said quietly. Naomi gave a faint, tired smile. My shift ended. Ethan nodded awkwardly. Strange. He negotiated billion-dollar deals without fear, but speaking to her now felt unexpectedly difficult. Rainwater dripped slowly from the edge of the fire escape above them. Somewhere nearby, a truck backed into an alley with a soft mechanical beep. Ethan finally sat down on the opposite end of the concrete bench, leaving respectful distance between them. For a while neither spoke. Then Ethan looked toward the empty street ahead. You should not be working here. Naomi stared quietly at the wet pavement beneath her shoes. And where should I be? Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. He realized he did not actually know the answer. Naomi folded her hands together against the cold. People always say things like that after they find out I am educated. She said softly, as if serving tables suddenly becomes tragic. Ethan looked toward her carefully. Is it not? Naomi smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it now. No. What is tragic is how differently people treat you once they believe you are worth listening to. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan leaned forward slightly, elbows resting against his knees. Lorenzo told me about Florence. Naomi's expression shifted immediately. Guarded now. Quiet. Ethan continued gently. He said you were brilliant. Naomi looked away toward the glowing city street beyond the alley entrance. That was a long time ago. What happened? For several seconds, she did not answer. Ethan almost apologized for asking. Then Naomi finally spoke. her voice calm but softer than before. My mother got sick during my second year overseas. Lupus. Ethan listened silently. Medical bills grew faster than scholarships. Naomi let out a slow breath that clouded in the cold air. I came home planning to take one semester off. She looked down at the silver bracelet beneath her sleeve. One semester became 5 years. Ethan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He studied her face beneath the dim yellow security light. There was no self-pity there. No bitterness. Just exhaustion carried with dignity for far too long. Why did you never go back? He asked quietly. Naomi laughed once under her breath. Because life keeps moving while you are trying to survive it. The alley fell silent again except for distant sirens somewhere across the city. Ethan looked at her carefully now, truly carefully, perhaps for the first time since meeting her. He noticed the tiredness beneath her eyes, the worn edges of her winter coat, the calm way she spoke about sacrifice like it was ordinary. Tonight, Ethan said slowly, you protected people who spent hours looking down on you. Naomi turned toward him at last. I did not do it for them. Then why? Her answer came quietly, but without hesitation. Because allowing people to fail when you can help them changes who you become. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment after that. Somewhere deep inside him, something old and hard was beginning to loosen. Naomi stood slowly from the bench and slipped her bag over her shoulder. Good night, Mr. Calloway. Ethan looked up immediately. Naomi. She paused near the alley entrance beneath the glowing hotel sign. Ethan swallowed once before speaking again. I was wrong about you. Naomi studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, tired smile. No, she said gently. You were wrong about people like me. The next morning, Manhattan woke beneath pale winter sunlight and streets still wet from the night before. Traffic rolled endlessly through the city while steam drifted from subway vents and coffee carts lined crowded sidewalks. Inside the glass headquarters of Calloway Technologies, Ethan Calloway stood alone in his 42nd floor office, staring at a legal document projected across the massive screen behind his desk. The same Italian claws Naomi Brooks had caught in seconds now glowed in black and white beneath fluorescent conference room lighting. 3 attorneys sat silently nearby, flipping through translated pages with visible discomfort. How did this get approved? Ethan asked quietly. No one answered immediately. Finally, one attorney cleared his throat. The wording was subtle. Ethan looked up sharply, subtle enough for a waitress to catch instantly. Silence filled the room again. Ethan turned back toward the city skyline outside his office windows. Naomi's voice kept replaying in his mind from the night before. Intelligence does not impress people nearly as much as power does. The truth of it unsettled him more with every passing hour. Around noon, Ethan found himself doing something he almost never did. He searched for someone instead of waiting for them to come to him. 20 minutes later, he stepped through the quiet lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, carrying no assistants, no security, no cameras. Hotel staff immediately straightened when they recognized him, but Ethan barely noticed. Is Naomi Brooks working today? He asked the manager directly. The manager blinked in surprise. She is on lunch break right now, sir. Ethan nodded once and walked toward the employee cafe in the rear corridor. The small cafeteria looked nothing like the grand ballroom upstairs. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Plastic chairs scraped against tile floors. Coffee machines hissed in the corner beside vending machines and microwaves. Naomi sat alone near the window reading from a thick paperback book while slowly stirring cream into a paper cup of coffee. She looked up in visible surprise when Ethan entered. You found the employee cafeteria, she said softly. Ethan glanced around the modest room. Apparently billionaires are allowed back here too. A tiny smile touched her face before disappearing again. Ethan sat across from her carefully. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan placed a slim folder onto the table between them. Naomi looked down at it without touching it. What is this? The corrected contract. Naomi looked slightly confused. Ethan continued quietly. You were right. Completely right. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair. I assumed your lawyers would figure that out eventually. Ethan let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. That is the problem. They did not. Naomi studied him carefully now. The cold arrogance from the ballroom was gone from his face today. In its place sat something far less polished. Humility. Ethan folded his hands slowly on the table. I owe you an apology. Naomi looked down at her coffee. You already apologized. Not really. Ethan shook his head lightly. Last night I apologized because I was embarrassed. Today I am apologizing because I finally understand what I did. The cafeteria around them remained quiet except for the distant hum of kitchen equipment beyond the swinging doors. Naomi stayed silent, letting him continue. Ethan looked directly at her now. I reduced you to a uniform before I even learned your name. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the warm coffee cup. Ethan swallowed once. And the worst part is that I honestly believed I was a decent man while doing it. Something in the honesty of that sentence softened her expression. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded business card. Callaway Technologies sponsors international education programs, he said carefully. If you ever wanted to return to academic work, I could help. Naomi stared at the card but did not take it. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan answered immediately this time. Because people helped me when I was young. He paused before adding softly. And because someone should have helped you a long time ago. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the table for several seconds. Then, very slowly, she pushed the business card back toward him. Ethan looked confused. Naomi finally lifted her gaze again. I appreciate it, she said gently. But I do not need to be rescued, Ethan. Her voice remained calm. Kind even. But the words landed with perfect clarity. Ethan sat back silently after that, realizing she had just given him another lesson he probably deserved. Across the cafeteria window, pale winter sunlight spilled across the city while Naomi returned quietly to her coffee. And for the first time in many years, Ethan Callaway understood the difference between helping someone and trying to save them so you can feel better about yourself. 1 year later, snow drifted softly across Brooklyn sidewalks while warm golden light spilled from the tall windows of a renovated brick building on Carlton Avenue. Children's laughter echoed inside beneath strings of paper lanterns and shelves filled with books written in 6 different languages. A polished brass sign beside the entrance read Brooks Language Initiative. Families crowded the small auditorium carrying winter coats and paper cups of hot chocolate, while local reporters adjusted cameras near the back row. On the small stage, a group of children practiced introducing themselves in Italian and French, their nervous voices rising and falling beneath soft piano music playing through hidden speakers. Naomi Brooks stood near the curtain in a deep blue sweater dress, with a stack of lesson folders held against one arm. She looked different now. Not richer exactly. Stronger. Rested. The exhaustion that once lived behind her eyes had softened into quiet confidence. Mia hurried toward her from the front row, clutching a paperback Italian workbook to her chest. Miss Naomi, the little girl whispered excitedly. I remembered the whole speech. Naomi smiled warmly and crouched slightly to straighten the child's crooked scarf. I knew you would. Mia grinned proudly before racing back toward the other students. Naomi watched her go with gentle affection. Across the auditorium, another figure stepped quietly through the entrance without drawing attention to himself. Ethan Callaway paused near the back wall beneath glowing holiday lights, removing snowflakes from the shoulders of his dark wool coat. Nobody announced him. Nobody rushed toward him. For once, he seemed grateful for that. He stood silently watching the children on stage stumble through foreign phrases while parents applauded every imperfect sentence. A year ago, Ethan would have measured success through stock prices, acquisitions, and headlines. Tonight, he found himself smiling because a nervous 8-year-old had correctly pronounced a French greeting into a microphone. Strange how much a person could change when they finally learned to listen instead of perform. Naomi noticed him only after several minutes. Their eyes met across the crowded auditorium. Ethan offered a small respectful nod, but stayed near the back wall instead of approaching. That mattered more to Naomi than he probably realized. The program began moments later. Children took turns reading poetry, translating simple stories, and introducing family members in different languages beneath warm stage lights. Some stumbled nervously. Others forgot lines halfway through. Every single child received applause anyway. Near the end of the evening, the program director stepped onto the stage, smiling brightly. Before we conclude tonight, she announced, there is one person we need to thank. This program exists because Naomi Brooks believed intelligence should never depend on zip code, skin color, or family income. Applause filled the room immediately. Naomi looked startled as the audience rose slowly to their feet around her. Parents clapped. Teachers clapped. Mia practically bounced with excitement in the front row. Naomi stepped onto the stage beneath the warm lights, looking overwhelmed by the standing ovation surrounding her. Then, from the very back of the auditorium, one final pair of hands began clapping slowly. Ethan Callaway. Naomi looked toward him instantly. He stood alone beneath the holiday lights with genuine admiration written plainly across his face. No arrogance. No pity. Just respect. Real respect. The applause continued while soft snow drifted outside the tall windows behind him. Naomi smiled faintly before stepping toward the microphone. For a moment, she looked out at the children filling the front rows, then toward Ethan standing quietly in the back. Language, she said softly into the microphone, is powerful because it allows people to feel seen. The room fell completely still. Naomi's eyes moved across the audience slowly. But kindness does something even greater. Her voice remained calm and warm beneath the glowing stage lights. It allows people to finally see each other. Silence followed for one beautiful second before the room erupted into applause again. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly after that, humbled in a way no business deal had ever managed to accomplish. A year ago, he had spoken another language to make someone feel small. Tonight, he sat quietly among strangers listening to the same woman teach children how to rise. And somewhere beneath the warm lights, drifting snow, and joyful voices filling the room, Ethan Callaway finally understood that dignity was never something wealth could give another person. It was something every human being deserved before they ever entered the room.